This is from the website, The Way, the Truth, and the Life. This is my introduction to early Christianity. This section was motivated by a PBS public broadcasting service program titled The Diversity of Early Christianity. It is Friday, May 10th, 2013, and I was pleased in the work on this foundation. I ran across Turkish university professor published history on early Christianity around the Black Sea. And in fact, there's much about early Christianity that still exists and is not a matter of any record because it is a personal and interpersonal private matter, basically, homes and friends. And the major thing about peaceful relationships with people searching for the meaning of life, there are two. The third one is basically a philosophy that are very peaceful. That is Christianity, Buddhism, and Taoism. And these flourished not in priesthoods, they flourished in homes and still do. The Taoism is more like a philosophy that has that peaceful spirit of Christ. It'd be like water when problems come, like a hand passes through and the water just returns to its own level, not to become absorbed in vengeance and hate. But not to get distracted, there's so many things going on. In the early Christianity, Paul and Peter and his wife were in what they call now Turkey, establishing churches, and they were not what you read about. They're not what's in history. We're talking about homes and families where two or more are gathered in my name, I am with them. The fellowship of love, and that God is love. Of course, God is everything. Matter, space, and motion. That's operationally defining God. That's the eternal matter from which all things are formed. Creation isn't some magic poof, like some would say the Bible says, or in the gobbledygook of modern physics 10 billion years ago, poof, some magic creation. It's nonsense. Matter is not created or destroyed. Space is not created or destroyed. And the capacity for motion of matter is not created or destroyed. They're eternal. This is God's physical existence, infinite and eternal, always and everywhere. And the thing that gives it reality to us is our location and the fact that the density is finite. And from this eternal matter, objects form and life develops. It is part of the logos, part of the laws of nature. That is God's laws, what can be, how this, the physics of this reality, which doesn't change, and the laws don't change. The forms do, and the way forms behave as they alter, that behavior changes. But the fundamental laws are eternal. And it's nice what Paul said about in God we live and move and have our being. The written words are only a description of something. put a description of corn on a piece of paper and put it in the ground and it won't grow. Now we are getting to the point where, understanding genetics, we could, in some near time, recreate life. And some minor aspects of it have already been accomplished. It's wonderful how we're learning the laws of God. In my grandmother's lifetime, they didn't have electricity. They didn't have cars. They didn't have planes. They didn't have running water unless you were downhill from a spring or a lake. But back to this early Christianity, it has to do with love. The background is a harsh one. For millions of years, what survived was tribes where the men would attack another tribe, kill the men and take the young women, children as slaves and property, or just make them part of their community. But the women were in subjection. A lot of background genetically in men and women had to do with millions of years of survival. And a little background here so you understand. The stories in the Bible have to do with people that had insight, and in the best words that they could in the time that they tried to pass on what was worthwhile and would help their children and grandchildren and the future life. Think of life as something that began in the order of 5 billion years ago. On the earth, a process of survival as things built, as molecules built, as time and chance built, and what was more able to survive. And it's very special because the space junk hitting all things. And in another place I could get into that, so much goofiness in the university with plate tectonics violating Coriolis effect. The reality is that the matter on the Earth was all together. You see where Africa and South America fit together. And there was land, a spot that faced the sun all the time in synchronous orbit. I think it's Mercury has something like that now. But the dirt from the sun built up on this face. And it was a weather pattern of hot in the center with clouds, a mushroom cloud, rain, a ring around the outside as the vapor cooled and went back. And of course the back facing away from the sun was ice cold. But there was a ring of life, and the moon hit the earth from behind, started it spinning. It spread these planets out, including Antarctica. There's dinosaur fossils there. It was up here, part of this Pangea, or whatever you want to call it, that blob that faced the sun. It killed the dinosaurs, and their egg crushed their eggs, and it gave an opportunity for mammalian life to develop. But then we have the great apes, which have 96% of our genetics. They, as a rule, do not kill their babies, and they breastfeed to the second molars many times. That's the equivalent to 6 years old. They care for their babies. The mothers do. What happened is there was a drastic change in weather, and it created a grassland, and the great apes migrated on some a tribe that survived, a single tribe that we can find genetically now in Africa. You can find that on the internet. But tracing back a few million years, but ever since recorded history, there's been violence. I said recorded history. Ever since humankind developed from the great apes, hunter-gatherers, up to 60% of the men died by violence, and the purpose of the violence was, for the most part, attacking another tribe to get their, killing the men to get their young women. And this violence of propagation and competition between men, and violence between men and women being raped, it goes on in nature all the time. Here in Russia, the dog is beaten. There's a pack of wolves after her, or same thing with cats. Women have historically sacrificed their children, whether it was throwing them off the cliff, throwing them in the river, leaving them in the woods for the animals to eat. In Pakistan today, in the major cities, they find the babies dumped in the garbage. There's a charity there that goes around picking up babies out of the garbage to give them a decent burial, getting rid of their unwanted children. But the foundation for Christianity, for humanity, started in Western culture with Abraham, as not sacrificing Isaac, but replacing human sacrifice with an animal, and setting a culture that respected the life of children. That was new and strange. They all had their little idols or their gods, or worshiping the Moloch, and had his hands out, and they'd dump the baby in the hands and it'd fall down into the fire while the priest played the drum, so you didn't hear it cry, screaming. And there's a Jewish tradition that Abraham's father was even an idol maker, but later converted to follow his son and get away from that business. And I could go back into the history of the Most High Unseen God, and the ocean sailing of the mammoth hunters, and all of that stuff, which would be interesting. But Christianity, the here and now problems, and the murderous cult of Islam, and the oppressive cult of Hinduism, and these things going on, and they call them religion, and compare them with Buddhism, Taoism, Christianity, and it's just, they're two different worlds. One is built on love, and the other is built on domination and hate. And worst of all, when I started studying Islam and found they had murdered in the order of 140 to 170 million, that's where the Roma came from 1,000 years ago, as Muslims were invading in Hindustan. And they moved off in the part of the warrior class of India that fought. They were pushed off their land for a couple of generations, and then immigrated to the West, where there was safe with Christians, and are still living there. When I got off the plane here in Mineral Nevada 2 months ago, there was Roma there with a baby and a handout, wanting some money. At any rate, this loving foundation of humanity was nurtured in the family farm areas as a personal home experience, like Jesus said, where two or more are gathered in my name, I'm with them. When you have a loving family, that's fellowship that invites Christ's Spirit. And where do you get loving fellowship? It is in a farm family. Not all, but many. Look at the Amish, and don't look at all the garbage that BBC would publish. There's many Amish, and amongst any group, there's a rebellion. That's a part of human nature. This nature of violence by men against other men and women, men wanting to dominate, is a genetic, one of the basic laws of behavior, of physiology. What propagates is what survives. It was the males who could work together in battle and get the young women that were attractive to them. That was the males that survived because they created new life. The inbreeding life died out, like the Queen's cousins, two of them, from all the inbreeding in the European royalty. But the women that survived were the ones who could manipulate the priest or the chief or other men to have some control in their life, to be manipulated. They didn't have the physical strength. But why do women, like I mentioned 140 to 170 million murdered by Islam. And I found out that was in 1400 years. And then I found out that many were murdered in less than 100 years by Islamofascism and communism. Islamofascism, the male-dominated murder rationale, and communism, the female-dominated murder rationale, to give socialism to everybody have free health care and women don't have to put up with a man. It's self-destructive. It's worse. I have a chart. As a matter of fact, I'll stop and get the chart to show you, compare these different things. Here's a diagram I was talking about. This is the murder rate per year, comparing. Now, Islam has been going on for 1400 years and has murdered far more than in these others. But this is the murder rate per year to compare what is the evils that are existing in our societies and cultures today, and how Marxism, when it had control, murdered 5 times more per year than Islam did. And fascism, when it had control, murdered 50 times more per year than Islam. And abortion murders 250 times more per year than Islam. So it's a no-brainer where the worst evil is, but they make it legal to murder, the same way Sharia law makes it legal to murder. Now, to go back to the foundation of insight, which is contained in the stories that were told from generation to generation in healthy cultures, the storytelling. I always tell the story of when I met Bruno Bettelheim, and he wrote about folk tales, and he wrote about autism. He had a home for autistic children funded by the Ford Foundation. He had been a survivor of the Nazi Holocaust. He was in a concentration camp, and in 1939 they let some go, and he was one of them. And he came to America and ended up with a professorship at a couple different universities in psychology, education. But when he retired, he was on a round of the universities giving colloquia. And the State University of New York at Buffalo Department of Education sponsored a colloquium that I went to. As I had read a number of his books, he studied things like the kibbutzim and how the children raised in the kibbutzim with the group daycare and so forth are more like brothers and sisters. They seldom intermarry. But things like this. But, I asked him, are you religious? And he said no, he was a Jew, but he said, I have a great deal of respect for the Jewish Bible, because when you study folk tales of healthy cultures, there are many of them carry similar folk tales. They are the stories of examples of good and evil that the elders would pass on as an education for their children and grandchildren. And he said the nonsense stuff got dropped. It doesn't today. It's hardwired in publication, so it's there for the goofy comic books for the next generation, and all the violence. As another thing is crazy. Deprive children of normal, like when I was a boy, you would see, and still here in Russia, you would see somebody, a relative who died, was still in the house, spread out for people to see, and then you went and put them in the grave. And you cared for the sick. You were with them. You saw the nature of life going up and down, and illness and death. They won't let children see this, and won't let them see the true violence, that they would have an awareness of reality, but they'll let them watch all these violent videos where it's an unreal thing, like killing isn't a human thing that they can associate with. It's a game. It's insane that they block children. Children do not have the same reaction to violence, that it doesn't have the same reality in their early stages of development. Professor at Syracuse University told the story of another professor who studied behavior, and he had a little girl, I don't know how old, 3 or 4. And he had gotten her a puppy, and he went out and drove out the driveway, and the puppy was under the car, and he ran over it and killed it. And he come in and told his little daughter, very sad, the puppy had been killed. And he says, oh, the puppy is dead. And the little girl said, oh, goody, we can have a funeral. It isn't anything evil. It has to do with this, like Piaget and levels of child development. There are levels of development of awareness of death and so forth. Children don't have the same perception as adults, and to deprive them of reality is a form of depriving them during their early brain growth stages of the things that give them common sense. That is the logical reasoning ability, and intuition. That's the nonverbal insights. That's what the indoctrination does when you make young children memorize. The reality is what you shove down their throat, whether they're verbally have to know what you said or have to read it. Da, 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 da. You deprive them. Is what and I'm going to the foundation of Christianity and cults, evil. Was there a time when that was valuable? Yes, there was. That started after Moses, and the example that Mohammed picked up on and used for his murdering pyramid scheme on the Koran was what he learned from the Jews. They memorized and made little robots out of their children. Well, that was to preserve a culture in the middle. They come out of Egypt, and here's all these tribes murdering them and murdering their children. And yes, they tried to make it a safe place for children to live and for them to live by those tribes that were murderous, exterminating them. It was a different time. What do you do with in a situation like that, where you've got cannibal cults and child murdering cults, and go to the next tribe and murder and take the women cults? How do you deal with it to make it a safe place for your children to live and grow up? So that's another time. The Jewish cult helped that culture, made robots that culture could survive for a couple thousand years without even a homeland. That's not today. Yes, there's a whole background there that we could talk about in the evil of not respecting the temple and all these things. But get into that, and I talk about that in this What's Missing. I have the PBS, it's a set of statements about early Christianity from a show on the public broadcasting system. And I have that, and I added to it What's Missing. And I have there the operational definition of God. God is physical existence, not created, not destroyed, and all things are formed out of his physical substance. For in him we live and move and have our being. I'm looking at the chart now, and maybe it would be helpful if I take and make a blow-up of that and show it to you while I talk. I've already mentioned the operational definition of God's physical existence and Paul's statement on Mars Hill about the unknown God, that it's the God we worship. In him we live and move and have our being. Now I'm going to back away from this for a minute just to give you the foundation of our existence as a background for the introduction to Christianity. Now, going back to this, why grade 8 mothers don't kill their children and breastfeed them with care until oftentimes the second molars, where human mothers seem to resent their children as well as care for them. If you wanted to use psychobabble, you might say something like schizophrenic or something. But two different ways of looking at their children, and two different relationships exist. One cold and resentful, and the other warm and sacrificing. How to see these mammals, a dog that will take and feed a deer or a cat or rescue other animals and get nurse it. But there's not the resentment, even though the dogs are raped repeatedly. And it's not something that is pleasant for them. The same for the cats, but yet they care for their young for the most part. Why? What's the difference between human females and lower mammalian females that they care for their young and nurse them? The answer is actually in the Bible, but it's mocked rather than understood. Now we genetically can trace back all human beings to a tribe in Africa. The tribe still exists. You can, if you don't understand that, you can look up genetics in Wikipedia, or there's some beautiful videos on it where they go back in the research, and the ones who actually did the research. It's in my lifetime, basically, since the main portion, since the 80s and 90s. Anyway, a few million years ago, great apes emerged out of the forest onto the savanna, grassland, and learned to walk enough to run, and make a way of life as hunter-gatherers rather than climbing into trees. And this process of men working together developed a brain difference. Human male brains have a couple billion more brain cells in the male than in the female, and the brain development is different in female and male. If a woman has a stroke, she tends to be able to walk or talk more than a man for one simple reason. The logical, verbal parts of brain activity and the nonverbal pattern intellectual parts in the lower apes and in females are all in one place. Both hemispheres duplicated. They're both in the same place, duplicated in the hemispheres. And that's why there's examples of females that have had severe damage to one hemisphere and they go on, or have a stroke and can oftentimes recover much better than a man. Men have one hemisphere develops as logical. That's typically the right hemisphere. Pardon me, the right hand, the left hemisphere. The right hand is connected to the left hemisphere, left hand to the right hemisphere. You understand the nonverbal things like intuitive, we call it intuitive knowledge, or painting, or many of the skills of music and so forth that have nothing to do with logic. It's a nonverbal in it. You can see these things, observing brain activity and the type of problem, doing a logical number problem versus some nonverbal face recognition type of thing. That can be broken into logic in a computer and sometimes in a male brain. But the point is, the male brain developed different because they needed to plan the future from the past, how to hunt, how to war, how to attack, how to prepare for the attack, what's coming in the future, not what's going on today. Where what gifts females have has to do with the here and now and seeing things as a whole. And the problem with murdering their babies, that's in the Garden of Eden story. The Garden of Eden is the Garden of Eden was the jungle before knowledge of good and evil. And the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is that brain development where there was logical speech so that you could make cause-effect relationships. The great apes don't have that. They don't have the logical language. So males developed it first and are best at that. Logic. I mean, the president of Harvard gets thrown out by the faculty because he says the truth about this. That's a whole another thing. You cannot be successful in a democratic, political, modern environment if you say the truth about women and men, and if you defend the rights of children, if you're against abortion, if you want mothers in the home to care for children. That's a whole nother thing. But in a farm family, you have that. The mother's in the home is the farm. And what a wonderful environment for a child to grow up in if they have healthy parents. So that's where Christianity, the concept of love and fellowship, and that spirit of Christ, the outlook of Christ, and being born into his culture, born again. It's a part of, for many who are raised with a caring, integrated farm family, because children are valued because they were the next generation to care for the elderly and take over the farm. And children knew they were valued and felt like an important part, not just stuck in an apartment memorizing something that somebody else said or read or watching some video game. So going back to the Garden of Eden story, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was the snake. That's the thing between the man's legs. The snake telling the woman where the babies came from. That millions of years of genetic buildup of resentment of the violence done to them and the domination of men. Where the great apes didn't associate the rape with the product of the rape, the child, even if they had male resentment and hatred. Females have that genetically. Not all practice it, and some know it, and the capacity to also love and respect and appreciate the protection and provision or home provision, or all of those are all true, but it's a mixed bag. We are not an entity. We have life stages. As our nerve growth factor is present in different parts of our brain, that part grows. Not more brain cells, more interconnections. If we don't have the stimulation at the time that nerve growth factor is present there, that doesn't develop. That experiment with background goes back into, I think, the 80s, where covering the eyes of rats and then taking the covering off for different groups at different times, and then as adults sacrificing them and studying the visual cortex and finding if you uncover it after a certain period, all the stimulation in the world doesn't cause the visual cortex to grow and give the visual ability. So that has to do with nerve growth factor being present. That's why childhood is so important. That's when these parts of the brain are developing, that if they don't develop, autism, now much autism is just bad behavior and breakdown of the home, no discipline. But neurologically, it's there. That can be detected with a brain scan before it's manifest. By a year old, you can tell this child is disabled because the area of the brain didn't get the stimulation needed to develop while nerve growth factor was present. And that child is condemned to be have that area of the brain not adequately functional. And we have many areas of the brain like that as we go through brain growth stages. They are different people. You don't modify that little baby. Your neurological stimulation goes in different places, and a different area of the brain develops. The needs of a little child are still buried deep within us. That's where the joy of intimate relationships between healthy people come from. the child is still there and needs love. But there's also the different physiological components of the brain, and we can see and study these things now. But women, the eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it's associated the genetic hatred for the male violence done to them with the product of that violence, the child. So that's what we all have to contend with. Men have their genetic load to contend with, women have their genetic load to contend with. And we need to breed healthy children. That's a whole nother thing. Murdering healthy babies and keeping unhealthy, genetically suffering, injured, permanently injured and disabled, keeping them alive and presenting their pictures to give money for that's a whole nother thing, so that a social worker can make a living rather than getting out and producing something. But their main work is to fundraising to pay their salary. But that's a whole other thing. All right, where are we going? We've got this foundation of women having a natural resentment of the male violence and projecting it onto their children. And Abraham setting an archetype example in the folk tales of the Jewish culture, that they didn't murder babies after that. And they come out of Egypt, and here's this baby murdering cultures and tribes that murder you when you go by them. And yes, they how do you destroy a destroyer? They went and destroyed them to make it a safe place for them and their children to live. And that is a judgment. To justify it the way that is what Muhammad learned. He learned two things: that the Jews killed and justified it with their Jehovah God as the Ten Commandments, and these people were guilty. They exterminated them to get the evil out. That Muhammad had his God, which justified him murdering and taking women and booty of anybody who wouldn't submit to him as the latest and greatest prophet, who had Jesus, who he was not the Christ. Muhammad was an antichrist. He had Jesus, a minor prophet, who made mud birds and blew on them and they fly away. One of the foolish books written by the Gnostics. But all right, that brings us up to Jesus. Jesus was a product of love and saw love and saw that God was love, the God that we want, that is the Father of heaven, what we want, where it's a nice place for our children and grandchildren. I don't have any qualms about magic. Christ in me is me understanding that love and that outlook and that culture and supporting it with my life and passing it on to those that I live with. And as children that I raise as much as I can. That's mainly a maternal responsibility, because of the maternal nursing bond, that's broken down. You've got a bunch of narcissistic, sadomasochistic, sociopathic nonsense being brought up with autism half the time. And just look at the orphanages that Ceausescu built, and look into that, and you can see where autism comes from. That's a whole other story of information available. So this is the introduction, and I'm going to look at that chart again, and what I see there is, I'll just quickly, I'm looking at it as I talk to you. The personal relationship with our source of existence. And that is in sharing with other people. There does seem to be something that we don't understand in the power of prayer. There may be electromagnetic communications we don't understand. I'm not going off into goofy other dimensional worlds or something. I'm talking about supposedly there was an experiment by Russians that had a litter of rabbits, that they took the litter away from the mother in a laboratory in Moscow or somewhere, and the litter out on submarines, and the litter sacrificed one at a time, and the mother with electroencephalograph electrodes connected to the brain, and the mother reacted whenever her babies were killed. And how true that is, I don't know, but there is another, I think it was at Boston hospital, where they had double-blind study of people being prayed for and one another not being prayed for, and showed a statistical significance in the praying. But whether or not that's true, there is a truth that I understand about this. When I was in Lithuania in '97, I went to a home church meeting in Riga, Latvia, and one of our home ministers was there that had worked in the homes back in communist times. He mentioned how much easier it was. You didn't have to have a visa for all the different countries. You had a Soviet visa. At any rate, I had another, when we were teaching spoken English at a summer camp in Lithuania, and a friend and I, George Nikolakopoulos, drove to this Riga for this Sunday morning meeting. And this minister, home minister, was from an engineer originally from Australia, and an old man at the time. He was in town getting some help for tinnitus, the ringing in his ears. And after the meeting, we were invited by the woman of the home to stay for lunch. And we're talking to this minister, and George, my friend that I'd taken with me, we had rented a car, asked him, how many languages do you speak? And he said 9, and or 12. And how many do you speak fluently? 9. And what is your method of learning a language? And he said very simple, 2 things. 1, a good example. By that he meant a good spoken example. And then repetition, repetition, repetition. And I had been studying the physiology of different parts of the brain and learning. And when he said that, I realized, my goodness. And I was teaching math for the bad boys and having a lot of children with math and learning disabilities. And I saw a lot of insight all of a sudden. Here he's talking about how do you learn a new language. A good example, that means you hear it. That's one part of the brain, knowing the information. And you think about it. That's another part of the brain. Then you verbally articulate it. That's another part of the brain. and then you think about it again, and you're using 3 or 4 different parts of the brain learning the same thing, verbally, non-verbally, anticipatory. And I picked up on that and used it to teach mainly 9th graders that had math disability. I was given this teaching math for the building trades, which are called math for the bad boys, but many had math inadequacies, and it had to do largely with the multiplication table, where they had a hang up and that they had learned to multiply by adding at the simplest level. How 3 times 3, they would take 3 and 3 are 6 and 3 are 9. They didn't have multiplication, which took memorization of the multiplication table. I had a computer set up with a little program that would say what the answer was and would ask a question. And I had them say out the question, like 5 times 9 is, and then if they didn't know, see the answer, 45, and go through this verbalizing as they went through solving the problems. And I used it with a number of students that overcame the math disability. So that's just insight into how valuable saying as things are, hearing things, and communication and interaction, the stimulation of it, and what it does for brain development in children. If we engage them in memorization, we make robots out of them. If we're talking about in God we live and move and have our being, that they get to know God, their physical reality, and the human interactions, and thinking about it, that they learn God's behavioral laws, how you raise children in a healthy way. So at any rate, look at what I have here. Those who confess the Son of God, God is in him, and he in God. And we're talking about being able to recognize love and love one another. Like you see 2 children on a playground, that there's this caring. Many of them have the ability, and I just took Doreen out here yesterday, and a little girl she never met before. They had a wonderful time playing. Another time you take her out there and she get somebody she doesn't know, and they're mean to her. But this caring fellowship, wonderful thing. And the statement about God is love, and that Christ came in this spirit, this outlook, and that we need to share it with one another. And in the family farm homes is where this flourishes, where this spirit of love, this outlook of love, this culture born again of loving nature comes from. And when we all have to put up with our genetic load, but we can overcome and be born again into loving and caring for others and working together. How the home churches, Paul, Peter, Matthew, and some with their wives or sisters, they were in the Byzantine Empire, what's now Turkey, and the Black Sea, and the early Christianity spread into the Caucasus, but especially the Black Sea basin, where the family farms were before the advent of all this murderous invasions of the Mongols, who were not farming people. There's a thing about that turn up on the end of their shoe was so they wouldn't dig the dirt. They were not farmers. But before that time, and before the feudal period, while there was still private property and people working together to make a healthy, safe community, and the farm that they farmed, is where Christianity flourished, because it was just an expression of what was in their culture anyway, and the opportunity to share and care and respect their source of existence, and the wonderful teachings of Christ to love one another as God loved you, and to get together in homes, and then in a few homes gathering in a meeting where the elder or bishop was just the man who owned the home. I go into where there's an example where that was corrupted in the Bible. And in one of John's epistles talks about one of these men wouldn't let the 2-by-2 ministers come anymore, and put them out of his home who would. That was an example of how the corrupted Christianity, this male dominant stuff, and the manipulation of the church officials, the female dominant stuff, took off in the world, having nothing to do with this home-loving religion, but having to do with gathering and building churches by giving people stuff. Going around with missionaries that give you something, rather than the spiritual truth of God, which flourished in the farm families with the 2-by-2 workers who followed what Christ said: take nothing for your journey, and just go and stay in the homes and spread the good news. And the fellowship opportunity that this offered for these communities was a wonderful and welcome thing. So the home churches grew like an underground movement. It wasn't underground, just no documentation. It's still the home church meetings here in Russia and in China and in America. There are some under what's now become a priesthood, but there are many independent ones, and some are goofy and some aren't. The Malakani, many groups tend to get corrupted into priesthoods and stuff like that, but the source is constantly reinventing itself out of loving homes and fellowship and appreciation and a desire to pass on a healthy culture and to build for a better future, which is called heaven. So that's the foundation of Christianity. It goes on, but how much evil is in the world today with the Islam. It's a murderous cult. And call it a religion, and it's the statistics that TEDx conference. That's another video I'm going to put out on, and how many intellectual Jews are so ignorant of their own cult background. It was appropriate and helpful when Moses came out of Egypt, and Joshua founded a homeland for them and worked and battled to make it safe, and they indoctrinated the children so they could have a bunch of robots to carry on their culture until a better time. Well, the better time came with Christ, and those who are maintaining the cult memorization are destroying their children. How ignorant the intellectual Jewish community is that there was what was behind the Soviet Communist Revolution, and destroyed a culture. It's going to hell here, and all the abortion more than live births, and the children being neglected, and the marriage all broken down. And Islam is going to take over. They've got a male-dominated thing to keep the women, at least in the home, and under subjection and caring for the babies, and having children so they can ride the Democratic bus to control. And it's going to happen. But it's a murdering cult. And what an evil cult Hinduism is, with class structure dominating, one class dominating another, and even making laws against conversion, as if it's a religion. Religion is a personal relationship between individuals and their source of existence, and the practice of religion and sharing that and having discussion is the joy of what's called a Christian church, a home meeting, not a priesthood. Christ was killed by the priests. Christ is the door opener, that we don't need to go to the priest. We can go directly to God. We can be forgiven, that we have all this genetic hangover from an earlier time that doesn't fit to make a healthy society or culture today, that we need to use love and reason to overcome this genetic conditioning that is lingering from another age when there was much violence and a need for it, because that's what survived. So anyway, I'm going to stop this introduction now, and this will be published as the introduction to the section on, let me look here again, the early Christianity. By the way, the Jewish is a cult, also looking into the terrible travesty of glorifying Islam in Spain, when the Jews were the enforcers for the Muslims. They rejected Christ as the Muslims do. Jesus is just a minor prophet subordinate to Mohammad in Islam, and Jesus is nothing if maybe a minor prophet into some Jewish. But the Jews even took up arms to dominate some Christians for the Muslims, and they were the record keepers and the doctors for the Muslims. They were the intellectual record keepers and enforcers. And many converted to Islam. But then how the Catholic Church was demonized. I have nothing for a priesthood, but the Catholic Church, after 700 years of rape, pillage, and plunder of Christians, having to provide virgins for the Muslims, even in North Africa, for the harems, and the enforcement of Islamic collecting money by the Jewish, their administrators. And when finally, after 700 years of this evil culture, you can understand the Christians and ones that converted from Islam back to Christianity because they were forced to by the Roman Church, and they go to South America, and they're the upper class then, and they treat the natives the way the Muslims and Jews treated them, and they live behind walls and keep them in subjection. But that's a whole other thing. I have a Mexican son-in-law, so give an insight into that. But so what did how did the Catholic Church get so demonized in Northern Europe? Because many of the Jewish escaped. They had been complicit with the Muslims. The Muslims went to North Africa. Many Jews escaped to Northern Europe where there were other Jews. The nobility in Germany had used the Jews as their rent collectors, the same as the Muslims had. They didn't want to educate the masses, and so there were many Jews throughout Europe, and the ones who were being prosecuted for their crimes escaped to Northern Europe with a hate for the Catholic Church and demonization of the Catholic Church and a glorification of Islam in Spain. Oh, but that's Judaism is a cult. The children are robots for Orthodox Judaism, and that's what Muhammad learned. Yes, the Jewish cult says it's going to be the world leader, but they're not engaged in murdering. They're engaged in intellectual sophistication at the university and in their business matters. And the many rebel, but they don't have common sense and intuition because they were robbed of a childhood. They were made into robots. The Muslims have trouble rebelling because they can be killed. The Jews are just rejected. The Orthodox Jews and their children rebel. They're just and go out. They're just rejected. But they're both cults. They need to understand that Jesus came to do away with the priesthood, to give everybody a personal relationship with their source of existence. And that's altogether different than a cult that says you got to come to some priest, to some building and give your money. It's different than building a healthy community where friends help friends and get together. Whether it was building a barn, or that's still going on in some communities. And here in Russia, they're trying to get some of the Russian Amish coming back from Argentina, where they survived since the 1700s and 1800s. And hopefully they can get some healthy farm, family, Christian culture going here again, because it's a broken society and it's going to be dead, the same as Europe. Islam has a birthing policy, and when they get enough, like they're doing in Indonesia, in Pakistan, and Philippines, in Nigeria, burning churches, killing Christians, in Somalia, in Sudan, and in Saudi Arabia. They get all this money, they're building mosques all over and teaching this murderous book that they have to memorize it and make little suicide robots out of many of the boys. And 2 cities there that it could be your death if you're a non-Muslim and you get caught there. That's the prerogative of the judge. They'll wake up. It's an evil murdering cult. It's built and modeled after another cult, Judaism, which was appropriate for another time, but now it's a crime against humanity to indoctrinate children. Yes, teach them respect. Raise them in love. Teach them to respect their environment. Whereas these environmentalists realize how important it is to raise healthy children and start appreciating the love of their source of existence, and having home meetings where they teach this love and care and return to a productive way of life, a productive family way of life, and build something that will withstand the evil to come and build a better future, hopefully become technologically advanced and be able to escape this planet before it ends. And that's an important concept. Life has not ended for It's in the order of a billion years. The molecules building have not, that process has not been killed. If you killed all of the animals at the time the dinosaurs were killed, you'd have to go back to plankton multiplying again and go through the process again. We are the product of an unending life. We are like a cell in the body. And how wonderful the awareness. We're the awareness in God's body. And we could, out of love, care for the future, care for the intelligence that will emerge from us, whether physically or intellectually. That gives our life purpose. And the idea of a new body, replacing body parts all the time. How wonderful. At some point we won't need the biological procreation even, to have a body that doesn't suffer pain. And will it have meaning? I don't know. I know our lives have meaning today because what we do determines whether life will go on in the future. So our life can have, that can give purpose and meaning to our life beyond just the narcissistic, sadomasochistic, pathological involvement because we didn't get enough love when we were young. Let's care about the children. It's not intellectual. You might want to be the best mother and father in the world, but if you don't have that early caring, you're not going to be able to have a caring bond with a child. And they need it for their own development. It's a process. Anyway, that's my introduction. Thank you. I end this with showing the frame from the introduction to early Christianity, and that would be at the website, The Way, the Truth, and the Life, and it would be the foundation, 1, in the first section of that, and the 12th part of that first section. So you can go to that on the website. And I might add that I was making another video on the nonsense that academic ignorance parading as intellectual insight and getting so much recognition from the people that are ignorant of the sophistry. And it's bred by the ignorance of book learning rather than hands-on-the-ground experience, so to speak, that is lost now with children being raised like chickens in a chicken coop with no contact with their natural source of existence and physical reality. It's all an artificial reality, man-made reality. No contact with the nature. That at any rate, that I'll try to finish that video in the next couple days. Thank you.